Welcome to the OUV podcast. In this episode, we talk about finding work in the cultural sector, Schrodinger's Immigrant, and finally, Michel recounts that time he made small talk with a Nazi in the changing room. We'd also like to apologize for the technical difficulties we faced, as you'll hear in the first few minutes of the podcast. We record across two countries, Germany and France, and we moved our podcast by about 2 hours, and just internet traffic was just horrible and not working in our favor. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Testing, 1, 2, 7, 42, 17, 88, 93, 44. But for now, I'm picking you up clearly. It seems like the network is trolling us, because whenever we get to discussing, it just cuts out for some reason. It's like perhaps the NSA is watching us or listening in, and they keep censoring us because they think we're going to reveal some classified information.
Well, Martin, didn't you know that my next topic of conversation
Because you say that and it did that again.
I don't know. You know, did we talk about invading Area 51? Is that it?
Perhaps to free was it to free aliens or something?
No. So have you heard of this?
I heard of people planning to storm Area 51, and it started as a joke, and it apparently went offline, and some people are taking it more seriously than it should. And I get the feeling it started in 4chan. 4chan is like where the devil plants his cabbages. Or cabbages.
That's an excellent way of describing 4chan. Unfortunately, or fortunately, no, mostly unfortunately, most of internet culture starts from there. And then the popular things end up leaving there. It's not exclusively just 4chan, but that's where a lot of I don't like that website, let's put it that way. But a lot of funny content gets originated from there.
Yeah.
That said, there was a which basically was that everybody decides.
I lost you again.
Which part?
Where you said everybody decides.
Everybody decided that they would.
I have 60 milliseconds now. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's just that inconsistent thing that's a problem.
Yeah.
Everybody decides to invade Area 51. Nobody can stop us. That's the joke. But it got so serious that there was actually briefings at the Pentagon with top-level generals on the different internet memes that they were using. So they actually had to explain and demonstrate how to run like Naruto to a general, which is ridiculous.
Speaking of the internet and memes and generals using memes, I saw something on Twitter. I know we're on a tangent now, but I think it's a relevant tangent. Someone said that before the internet, people used to say that stupidity arises from people being unable to access information. But what the internet shows us is that stupidity has another source. It has a different source, which is not necessarily, because the internet essentially made infinite information accessible to most people, not everybody, but most people.
But but think about it like this, and I will try my hardest to bring it back to the titles that we did. But it's a good thought, I think. If I were to give you a rocket science book, basically it's the perfect guide to constructing a rocket which will send a satellite into space, okay?
Yeah.
Chances are, considering your educational background and mine too, granted if I was in this spot as well, chances are you will not be able to build that rocket even at a base level, understand what's in that book, but you'll have all that information, right?
True.
So what you end up making, because you were told that you should make something out of this, will not look anything close to what a rocket is, but according to your understanding, use rocket.
According to my understanding,
with the assumption that before that you never knew how a rocket was made or built, right?
Right.
So in that sense, while you are literate and you can read and and you can digest information, you might not be able to do anything with information that you are not particularly educated in.
Speaking of information and how lots of information can be useless in a way, tying it up with spies again, one of the biggest criticisms of mostly the NSA and other I don't want to say popular but well-known large scale or intelligence agencies that operate on a large scale is that the amount of information they are collecting from people is just too much, and not too much that it's harmful to the people, but too much that it makes the intelligence process way more complicated because you're just gathering now everything, and what to do with it is difficult because when you're thinking of what to do with this information, it keeps increasing at an exponential scale.
Yes. Very true.
So if we move out of our tangent and go back to where were we?
So what I was going to do with that is the fact that all this to identify how to use a lot of this information. Your education background, right? See where I'm going here?
Yeah.
Your education background is really key to letting other people know what you're capable of.
Nice segue.
I know, right? But many people don't. If in the end, it's very, very likely that neither you or I will be in culture anymore, right? Because essentially
I lost you again. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just saying that you have to earn money to help support the family as a unit, right? So you and Laura both will probably find jobs to support the child that you have, right? Yeah. That's something you have to do.
Yeah.
For me, I have loans that I have to pay off, which I've already complained about my loans plenty. And I want to be in a spot where I don't have to rely 100% on others to support me financially, because that's not good.
It's not good.
And that changes our priorities. And even though we studied and worked in culture, culture is very much an entrepreneurial career, I would say. It's two things. It's public or it's entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're specialized. If you're specialized, then you do your specialized job, or the work that you are better at. But in my case, I'm not specialized. I'm specialized in culture, which means to my plentiful skills. It's just my skills don't suit most organizations. Oddly enough, UNESCO is one of the few organizations which my skill set really works well at.
And you have a place to stay in Paris.
That as well. So
which is really big.
It's huge. No, it's huge. But the chances of me actually getting a position at UNESCO once I finish my internship is going to be minimal because they don't want to hire people from the U.S. And because UNESCO and the U.S. no longer are connected in that way.
What if you become French?
Well, that it doesn't help either to have the French passport, because there's an overrepresentation of French at UNESCO, and they want.
What do they want?
Countries at UNESCO. And so what I've been told is that when they look to hire, there are three things that they look for. Professional competency comes first, technically. Second is nationality.
Yeah.
And then third is gender.
So, nationality, do they pick, are they going for mostly underrepresented countries? And
yes,
with
exactly.
With gender, are they going mostly for women, I guess? Because mostly when I see gender being used in terms of employment policy, it's usually to bring more women into the workforce.
It's
not just women, but not men or cis men. to be more specific.
Yeah. Well, in the case of UNESCO, it's supposed to be it's supposed to be an equal balance within whatever departments that you're working in. So, for example, it is very possible at UNESCO that
Check.
more often than not, it's highly skewed in one direction, which is there are more men at UNESCO than. But once again, that's third. That's typically third in that process. But in the end, right, if they're hiring you, your professional skills. If you get to the second round, right, they're already considering your professional skills. So that's when nationality comes in.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I like it because sometimes when you hear about about organizations or companies having an employment policy, sometimes inclusion overrides professional competence, which can be a bad thing. But if they look at professional competence first, I believe that's a big plus.
It is. And go ahead.
In as much as nationality and gender might disfavor some people. And just in line with that, while I think this is a good thing, I think it's the intentions are really noble, but this approach to making some aspects of society more inclusive they're counterproductive in that some sections of society are now beginning to feel excluded, so to say.
Yeah,
that's not really the case, but I'm gonna use the example of the US, American political and the political landscape. A lot of one huge talking point within the right wing is usually that straight white men are being discriminated against on a large scale, whether it's going into university or in the job market.
Sure.
It's a talking point that's gradually gaining traction. Because of a really noble initiative.
Yeah.
And
now
I don't really have a solution for it, but yeah.
No, there's no solution to what is it? Band-aiding the feelings of white men who are, oddly enough, some of the most sensitive people in this world. I would know. No, it's funny that you mentioned that, right? Yeah. It's because a lot. Yes, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Disparity in class, in type, in the amount someone earns. Yes, that is always prevalent. No matter which society that you take, whether it's any right. Kenya probably has similar class issues.
If definitely.
Vastly different in terms of context, but it's there. Germany has the same thing. France has the same thing. U.S. has the same thing. And I think what ends up happening is that since most of these, we'll go with what you highlighted as white male.
Yeah.
Right. Since they've never really felt true injustice before, right?
Yeah.
All they've had is the American dream, the idea that if you work hard and play, if work hard, play hard, you do your work, and then you get rewarded for the fact that you did your work well. And when that's not the reality, that's when that's when anybody, not just white men, that's when you start to question, okay, if that's not working, then it can't be me because I worked really hard, so it must be something else.
Yeah.
And it's easier to believe, it's way easier to believe that it's not your own government that's doing this to you. It's way easier to believe that it's other people not related to the government who are doing it to you.
True. And
it's honestly why the Cold War, that's why the US won. Because essentially what they used was really high tension media to point the fear of Russians into every single citizen in the US, to the point where they were so terrified of this other that they busted their butts to basically work and essentially become the number one superpower.
Fun fact,
Yes.
We're currently watching Stranger Things season 2, and people have really pointed out how much they try to bring out the 80s accurately. And one thing is that 11. Have you watched Stranger Things, right?
I'm aware of, yes. Okay. Spoilers to anybody who doesn't watch, I guess.
Okay, yeah. It's not so much a spoiler, but there's this kid who has these immense supernatural powers.
Yes.
But the media reports that there's sightings of a Russian girl.
Yeah,
I believe that has nothing to do with how she looks, but more to do with the fear that people had.
Yes.
The fear that was fed into people about the Russians or communists. And
yeah,
I was wondering
I
was wondering in my head if in popular Russian media, mostly during the time, did they also have movies where the baddies were Americans, and did they portray them as these soulless bad people, so to say?
You know what? I would not be surprised. I would love to ask someone that. Do you know anybody from Russia?
I know Daria from Siberia, actually. Who else do I know from Russia? I know Paul has Ukrainian roots, not Russia. I have a friend from Russia, but he grew up in Germany. But we can find them on the internet.
Yeah, it might be worth asking.
But
yeah, tell me.
Speaking of people using the other, I initiated the conversation today by talking about this guy I met today, and we didn't talk much, but we talked. I feel like our conversation was really dense.
Okay.
At some point, we talked about the situation in the far-right situation in Cottbus.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by the far-right situation, you mean the AfD?
I mean the AfD, and I also mean Nazis, because they also exist there's a higher concentration of them in Cottbus.
I told you about my experience meeting someone with a swastika on their chest at the pool, right?
No.
What? I haven't told you this story?
No, you didn't.
All right. I'm sorry for whatever story you were just about to say.
No,
I'm
continue.
Going to take this over.
Swastika on the chest wins.
Only this once, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was surprised because my understanding is that any Nazi symbolism in Germany is illegal. It's just fact.
Yeah.
And I was at the pool, and I was I was going into the swimming pool, but before that you have to rinse, and so I went to the showers and rinsed. And there was a guy who came in, and as per usual in those bath in the shower situation, most guys at least are fully nude. Yeah. So in front of me is this guy who's just showering, and there is a big old swastika on his chest. Just it's like straight there. He had a bunch of tattoos, but the biggest one was on his left side chest, and I was surprised, and I didn't mention anything. And then he was commenting to me about I don't know what, because my German level was even lower than what it is now, so I didn't understand a word he was saying. But I nodded and I said, sprechen English bitte? And so he basically cobbled together. He was just trying to tell me. In that sense, he was hospitable in the sense that he was saying, the water is very nice, and it's nice. It's hot water. And he kept on getting closer to me, and I was so distracted because, of course, there's a swastika on his chest. Yeah. Let me remind you the fact that I'm standing with someone who's wearing essentially one of the most well-known symbols of hate.
Yeah.
Close to his heart. World, literally close to his heart. And so I was just backing. I was like, it's water is great. And then I left because I felt entirely uncomfortable. And so I asked, I forget who I asked after that, but they said, no, that's totally illegal. You should have reported. I was like, I had no clue. There's nothing. I wasn't taking pictures in the shower anyway. Yeah. So.
That would have been extremely awkward.
It was.
This guy, what if he calls the cops and says this guy is taking naked photos of me in the changing room, and you're telling the cops that there's this guy who has a swastika and I need to prove that he has it, so I have to be a creep for the greater good of humanity.
Right, and you know what?
Yeah.
In Cottbus, in the end, do you know who probably would be punished more? Me.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were talking about that subject, and he and his wife were they're not in Cottbus, but they're in a place called Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. It's another one of the states in Germany.
That's where Paul's from.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're saying they were in a place and there was someone had a Nazi era flag proudly displayed on a garden or something of the sort. And they were surprised that it was being treated like something normal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so but the gist of the conversation wasn't really Nazis, but being hostile to foreigners, or not all foreigners, but foreigners with specific shades of skin or who look like they come from a certain part of the world. And he was saying that that's not anything new. Even during the Cold War, when that was a different country in the DDR.
Yeah.
The same sentiment existed, but now towards the Vietnamese and Cubans, because a lot of Cubans came to work in Germany during that time. Countries that were aligned to communism or socialism. Because I know from Africa, there was workers who came from either Mozambique or Burkina Faso during that time, and I've had unpleasant stories about what happened.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that.
And he was just saying how in such situations, it's usually it's way easier for people who feel disadvantaged to be convinced that the source of your problems are these people. And not my people. Not my people, and not people who actually make the policies, but these people came from so far, these immigrants who are lazy and are stealing all the jobs. Schrodinger's Immigrant.
Schrodinger's Immigrant, yeah. That's today's episode title, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. This is not behind the screen Saturday. All right, whatever. Doesn't matter. You know what? I completely forgot. This is a sidetrack.
Yeah, it's okay.
Today, so I feel like that there's a good majority of Americans who have been educated in the system to be very aware of let's call it frankly, right? There's a lot of racist aspects in many policies and many institutions in the U.S., whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And it's built in such a way where we, even the smallest thing, can remind us that you're not supposed to do this or you're not supposed to do that. So two instances where this is the case.
Yeah.
One colleague from a while ago, she comes from a section of West Africa. I don't want to be too specific.
It's okay.
For anonymity's sake. But they basically, they were asking me about the N-word. And they were saying, so Americans, you can't say that, can you?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I can't, because one, it's a pretty racist word, and two, because it's not for me. It's not a word for me. It's not. I never want to use it, and I never should use it. And they were very surprised because they thought because of course they can say it, no problem, because from where they come from, it's they just thought it was ridiculous that I couldn't say a word. So they asked, what about rap songs? Do you just not say all the lyrics to a rap song? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then another instance was today during Ultimate Frisbee. There you wear different jerseys, so usually it's dark and light. And so apparently they don't do dark and light. They say white and blacks. And so at one point, one of the team heads just yells, "Hey, lazy blacks, come over here!" I turned to him. I'm like, "My God, that's a terrible thing to say. What are you saying?" And he was like, "What did I say?" I was like, "Never mind."
It's good he didn't say it in Spanish. Hey, lazy negros.
Didn't say it in French either. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's no, I personally am very hyper aware when things like that happen, whether it's by accident or not. But oof.
Speaking of which, speaking of racist words and racist systems, first of all, about the N-word, I think for most people who come from Africa, it can be offensive in some instances, but for the most part, it doesn't carry as much weight as the black community in the US and perhaps those who are based in Europe.
True.
Yeah. But I was just thinking perhaps there should be like a racism scale of some sort, or a racism Venn diagram, so to say.
Can we leave my last name out of it? But yes, I agree.
Yeah, because I think there's different levels of racism, and these different levels of racism have different impacts, ranging from mild disappointment to annoying to making someone depressed to
being outright mean,
to causing injury to an individual, to causing death to an individual, to causing death to a community, or to causing misery to a community.
Right.
And like, for example, racial slurs are usually the biggest targets of people who fight against racism.
Right.
And but I think they fall relatively low on this imaginary scale that I just formulated in my head, in that someone across the street might just call you something bad, or and maybe continuously use that in their language, perhaps because of their background, perhaps because where they come from it's normalized, and they're saying it with less intended meanness. I don't know if I'm making sense. Like if someone is desensitized out of ignorance. I mentioned this because I've interacted with people who use some of the most awful words against dark-skinned people, for example.
Okay.
But they're really nice people. Like, again, I know it sounds ironical and maybe I'm being unapologetic for some racists, but I think racial slurs fall relatively low. People might also do it in a mean-spirited way, but the dangerous racism comes when it's baked into legislation.
Yes. Or
when powerful people do it behind closed doors, like powerful people who might be politicians, who might never use racial slurs, but they put in place policies that hurt sections of the community or of a community. Okay, continue.
So I agree with you.
Yeah.
That there certain things have a certain different long-term impact. But I would hesitate. I wouldn't put your scale then. I would rank the scale differently, right? Instead of a scale, I would have it in terms of how much impact does it have in the present, or like like a timeline scale, right? A policy can last for such a long time. It can last generations. And that, I agree with you, is very dangerous, because to remove a policy, to take out something which is in the system and is inherently racist, takes a long time and takes a lot of social, political pressure to move that type of thing if it's already set in place.
Yeah.
Now, while I do think that slurs and other derogatory terms tend to be more short-term, because they're said in the moment, you get frustrated or angry or furious that this was said to you, or it was said to friends, whatnot. But in terms of the long-term impact, once will be, it'll piss you off.
Yeah.
Twice will really piss you off. 3 times is when you start thinking, okay, there's something wrong, not only just with this being said, but the fact that it's been said so many times.
Yeah.
And so while I wouldn't put, I think it's the cumulative amount of this being said to certain communities or certain people, certain individuals, or that really make the long-term impact, because it's much more of a mental thing. Does this wear you down so much that you just lose your dignity? Then it's not it's just as bad as policy, and that is easier to fix than policy, I would argue.
Yeah. So I would agree and disagree again. I like this. We're debating a bit. First of all, I think I would compare. If I'd compare them to causes of suffering for humanity, I'd say perhaps on a scale of mosquitoes to nuclear bombs, I'd say that. No, that scale doesn't make sense. Okay, it's wrong, but I was gonna say that racial slurs are like mosquitoes, but policies that have racism baked into them are like nuclear bombs. It sounded right in my head, but the moment I spoke it became wrong because nuclear bombs are bad and they're the big boogeyman. I think actually it's the other way around. Yeah.
No. Think of it like this, though.
Yeah.
A nuclear bomb leaves radiation generation.
True, but mosquitoes cause malaria, which kill way more people. But their impact, if you look at a single mosquito, you might not think much of it.
Yes, exactly.
But it kills on a much larger scale. But a nuclear bomb is like a big boogeyman, and whenever it's mentioned, everybody's alert. And there's way more safeguards against them. Now I'm confused. I confused myself.
No. But let me try to salvage what we have here.
Yeah.
So here, right. The main thing with policies and governance, right, is that this is, once again, I'll just go with the long term. This lasts for a long time, and it impacts such a wide range of people that it disenfranchises almost immediately a certain section of the population, just because that's how it is, right? This is so much ingrained in the mentality that it's encouraged by the fact that you can be not nice, or you can say certain slurs to certain groups of people, and you won't get impacted. So I think, see, my thing is that they're too interconnected to keep them separate in terms of impact. Because if you can educate someone like me to say, okay, slurs, racial slurs, or whatever slurs, they're not good, and that's because they hurt people's feelings and it degrades their humanity, right? Then if that's ingrained into me at a young age, I then can question, when I'm older, I can say, okay, yes, I know it's bad because I don't want that to happen to me or my friend, but why? So then why are there still injustices in the system, despite us being all equal, right? It informs me how I should interact with other humans, and then informs how I should vote, at least in the US or here in France. It then says, okay, well, because I know I want to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity as me, or everybody has the same shot at life, right? Despite different situations, that will inform how I want my policy, what I envision for policies for the government. And that's where, as much as we hate it, politicians are useful, because they're the ones who actually are willing to do that type of work.
True.
But
so I think I'm in agreement with you about humanizing, working towards humanizing people who are being othered, or people at risk of being othered. That helps in fighting. That first of all stops the more immediate action, which might be using racial slurs against other people, to the extreme end of baking malicious intentions into the law, because the law has to be followed. Yeah, so I think my scale is a bit skewed.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like we're cultural professionals anyway.
Cultural professionals. Speaking of which, back to our initial topic about being cultural professionals.
Yes, and just so you know, we can probably make this our last talking point.
Yeah, that's what I call myself. I don't really have a term for myself professionally, but whenever I'm compelled to give that information, specifically mostly when I'm giving the Kenyan government or the German government information about myself, I call myself a heritage expert. But it kind of summarizes my skills. But again, it leaves out so much. It covers so much, and it's ambiguous and overly specific at the same time.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's honestly the reason why I decided the thesis that I did, because my idea was, how do we know that all these people that are graduating from World Heritage Studies actually know what they're doing? You don't. I mean, they have the degree and they are competent, but right? You don't know. It's purely based on what you do around the studies, not during the studies, which I find a shame.
Speaking of which, I'm still trying to keep on this talking point. I was listening to radio, to German radio on Friday, I believe, and they were talking about how some professions, specifically that usually have their names in German, are anglicized and fancified, so to say.
Yeah.
Job titles. Yeah, overly specific job titles. So I was wondering if should I describe my, should I call myself? I was thinking of, I'm seriously considering coming up with a name. Like one of the jobs I was applying to was a cultural adaptation technician. It was actually something for the U.S. military, because they have a base in Germany, in Ramstein, and a smaller one in Baumholder.
I visited the Ramstein base when I was young.
I've never been to Ramstein, but I know it's not far from here. Yeah, so where was I going with this? I don't want to disappoint.
Job titles.
Oh, job titles, yeah. Like here, let me just give you some examples. Beverage dissemination officer, that's a bartender. Chicken sexer, someone who determines the sex of chickens. Digital overlord, website manager. Retail Jedi, job assistant.
Are these actual job descriptions?
I'm gonna give you the link. I'm gonna share with you the link. It seems to be categorized and funny, but I believe some people use them. And I'm gonna link this up with what you talked about. Our field, the cultural field, being highly or extremely entrepreneurial. Are we on the same page?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Just a moment. So I just shared the link with you. You could take a look. Yeah, you talked about our field being highly entrepreneurial because there's not many employers or organizations that are actively employing people who have studied one or the other forms of culture. And so it's something that usually sticks in my mind a lot. Like, should I just go or continue going with heritage expert, or should I be a bit more specific? Because if I say world heritage expert, that's true and untrue. I studied world heritage, but towards the end, I gravitated more towards the intercultural aspect of heritage. And so I'm wondering, should I perhaps call myself an intercultural expert or intercultural technician or something?
I think
that sort.
No, here's what's funny. You call yourself a consultant.
Intercultural consultant.
Yeah.
What would you call yourself if we go with consultant or as a
cultural
suffix?
Heritage consultant?
Yeah.
I mean, that's I did that on my LinkedIn, for example, because it's easy. It feels like a cop out in the sense that I'm telling everything that's true, but I've never actually no. You know what? For me, I did work a short-term contract, and it wasn't necessarily a consultancy, but right, I can't. It is possible for me to consult on cultural heritage matters. That's a fact.
But but if you do that, like you did some contract work on as a cultural heritage consultant, but you defended a thesis that was seemed to be more from the perspective of an educationist. Would you call yourself a heritage studies educationist, for instance?
If anything, I would be a cultural heritage and higher education expert.
Yeah.
That would be the closest thing I can get. You actually have an opportunity with intangible cultural heritage consultant or expert, because expert I don't like using expert, but I undersell myself in every part of my life.
So consultant, I like consultant as opposed to expert. Yeah,
it's more suitable.
It's more suitable and less I am the knower of things.
Yeah, exactly. It's I can help you.
We can work together. Consulting sounds like let's work together towards a solution.
Yeah. All right.
So that's something I've picked up and something I think I might actually use moving on forward.
Great. I get 10% royalties.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
Intercultural consultant. Because my thesis, which I defended, because my degree is pegged on also, our master's degrees are pegged on what we eventually defended, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And mine was mostly based on ownership of cultural goods, so to say.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still at pains of how to really bring that together as an alternative description as an alternative professional description of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the consultant part I really like.
Cool.
Yeah, and as a placeholder, intercultural consultant, ownership of cultural goods consultant, because yeah. Are you good with time, or am I?
So I think we can use this to wrap up, and then we can after we cut the audio, we can discuss a few details of a possible guest who will not announce, just in case that they're not able to be on the show, and we're just telling everybody that we have a guest. But there's a potential.
Oh, and also to our listeners, are we still streaming live?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in the final product of this podcast, we had some difficulties. For those who are listening live, you'll know we had some technical difficulties. So there's some bits of the audio that are missing. So it's highly likely that the podcast will be segmented, perhaps with introductions in the middle.
Yeah. And we'll see.
We'll see how we'll
this
do
one
it.
Was a bit chunky, so
yeah. But the last 35 minutes or so are excellent.
No, it was good. Yeah.
And it was also not just a podcast, but it was also you were consulting professionally.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is good and might be of benefit to other people in a similar situation as us, who have the skills but don't know what to call themselves. First of his or her name, unless you're called Mohammed or John or what's another common name?
What's a common name in Kenya?
Mary. In Kenya, I'm not sure, but I think John is common. Mohammed is also quite common. Because we have a large, significantly large Somali community, and in addition to that, we also have Muslims who from different ethnic communities who use the name Mohammed. So I guess it's one of the more common names.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to everybody.
And I enjoyed the podcast.
Yeah.
Technical difficulties notwithstanding.
Despite the technical difficulties.
So I'm gonna end it here. Goodbye.
And see everybody next week, I guess.
See you.